So we should be online now. Hello, everyone. Um, let's see if the first people will join. There's some delay between. Oh yeah, I see people joining. That's great. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank you all in the name of Impact Revolution once again. My name is Linda. I am part of Impact Revolution, and today we're here for the first panel of our campaign, Plastic Mountains. So our team is hiking from Munich to Venice in order to highlight the multiple dimensions of the plastic crisis and to talk about systemic solutions. And today we're here for our first panel on plastic and health with Alexandra Caterbow from Health, Environment and Justice Support. I hope I said it right. Ella Daish, who is a campaigner for the End Plastic Product, um, End Period Plastic campaign, and Dr. Philipp Schwabl from the Medical University of Vienna and the University College London. Thank you again for being here. And without further ado, I would like to, so first of all, why we're here today, we want to talk about plastic and health, because we think that when we think about plastic, maybe we think about the bags in the supermarket, or we think about the straws maybe that we saw in turtles' noses. But there is so much more to the plastic problem than just this. Plastic problems affect our plastic pollution affects our health. It affects social injustices in the world, and it is of course very well connected with our economy. And these are the various dimensions that we want to explore during the campaign. But today we will start with health. So now, really, without further ado, I will give the word to Alexandra. Alexandra is the co-founder and co-director of Health and Environment Justice Support International. In her work, she focuses on chemical and waste issues, as well as sustainable consumption and production. Hay Support aims to achieve a healthy environment and environmental justice on a global, regional, and national level. I will start my screening now, hopefully. And no, it would have been too easy. So I hope you can see it.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for the nice introduction. So welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here to give you some information about plastic related to health. And if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, Linda, you already mentioned what we're doing, so I can I can skip that. That's really good, and go just right to the next slide. So this is a slide which I took out from this book, which is a plastic book for children, where I was helping as a um, advisor. And this is a slide that pretty well shows what plastic is and where the foundation of the health problems lie. So here you see the yellow dots are the polymers, and the red and blue and pink signs, these are the additives, and often additives are very harmful for health, also for the environment. And then we have these blue signs, blue rings here in this picture. And these are the non-intentional added substances, which are often often we don't know what it is. It happens. There are many examples where we found a lot of these substances, but we don't know exactly what they do or how they can be harmful, maybe. So if we go to the next slide, we have there are studies showing several health aspects, and these that I present here. These are just examples. So health impacts, negative health impacts of additives can come from, for instance, endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are, for instance, phthalates, brominated flame retardants, or bisphenols. And these chemicals can lead to, or are linked to diseases like diabetes, obesity, fertility problems, low semen quality, asthma, breast cancer, testicular cancer. Also, cancers that are related to the endocrine system, and also to developmental problems. The most harmful time, or the most sensitive time window for these chemicals is actually during pregnancy. So there, the body of the developing fetus is very vulnerable to these kind of chemicals, and often diseases can occur later in life. Then we have heavy metals, and these are very well known for many years. Lead, cadmium, they can lead to decreased IQ or impaired kidney function. And then there are a lot of other harmful chemicals in plastics, like vinyl chloride or styrene, which can also lead to different diseases like liver cancer, lymphoma, etc. So you see, this is just an overview, and it's already very scary. And if we go to the next slide, one of the big problems is that often the consumer doesn't know what is in the product. And I think we will hear more later from Ella about this. So yeah, we often say toxics in, toxics out. So you have the toxins in during the production, use, and then also later at the waste stage. And if the products are being recycled, then you can also find them even in recycled products, where the problem is that at this stage you don't know where it comes from anymore. So it's very difficult to trace it. Next slide, please. I brought you one example. There is a study that was done by a German research institute called ISOE, and they tested 34 everyday plastic products. And 2 out of 3 products contained hazardous chemicals. And one is even more worrying is that they kind of screened the chemicals in there, and they identified 260 different chemicals that they could identify, but they also found another 1,140 chemicals that they could not identify. So with this here at this example, you can see that there's a lot still unknown, but it's produced and used. So which should not be the case in the EU, because we have REACH, where it says no data, no market, but we can see it happens. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is an example from presented by the Food Packaging Forum. This is a Swiss NGO which is really doing great work on food packaging, and they, for instance, presented a study, which is referenced here, that brominated flame retardants were measured in approximately 40% of the tested food contact articles. And that is an evidence for the use of recycled waste of electronic and equipment. And yeah, so they are all black, and often it's they use like black electric cords that they recycle, like the plastic around in the cords, and then they are being recycled into, for instance, plastic food utensils. So this is another example where we can find harmful chemicals in plastic everyday products. Next slide, please. Yes, here another example, and that I like to bring to your attention is textiles or clothes. So a lot of people don't know that if it says this t-shirt is made of polyester, that means it's plastic. So polyester means plastic, 100%. And 60% of our clothes contain polyester. And 15% of the world's plastic production is for textiles. So textiles have like a huge portion of plastic use. And this is often unknown because you don't find them, for instance, at beaches. Because we have a lot of awareness, or at the moment, thankfully, there is a lot of awareness of plastic products that NGOs found at brand audits and beach cleanups. And this was also a trigger for the Single-Use Plastic Directive in the EU, which is really great. But we also have other uses of plastic that have a very high volume, but are not so much addressed by legislators yet. Next slide. And why is this a problem for health? Because up to 20 to 40,000 chemicals are being used for treatment and dyeing of clothes. And you may recognize familiar names already. So brominated flame retardants are among them, carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reprotoxic chemicals, or endocrine disrupting chemicals, but also perfluorinated chemicals and dyes. And this is a huge problem, not only for people who work in the textile supply chain. It's also a problem when you have like textiles being dumped somewhere in landfills around the world. And consumers cannot do much about it, unfortunately. There is no disclosure of ingredients. If you go to a shop, you don't know what chemicals are in there. And many labels are just greenwashing. They are good labels, but they are also labels that do not help much, or even try to pretend things that are not there. So 2 years ago, we made a huge report about textile labels and how reliable they are for consumers. And surprise, surprise, many of them are not very reliable and are more greenwashing than informative. Next slide, please. To give people more information about these problems and the labels, we launched a new website last week. It's called Sustain Fashion. And there we provide a lot of information about different topics. And we're so happy that it's launched that I wanted to share it with you today. So it exists in English and German. So please, next slide. Yeah, we talked about plastic products, but we haven't talked about microplastic so far. This is also a health problem. So here you see a graphic that shows that we kind of eat 5 grams of plastic every week. And there are not so many studies out there um, trying to find answers. What does this with our health? How harmful is it for our health? So the main exposure routes for microplastic are inhalation, fibers, for instance, and ingestion. And microplastic, and this I think we all know, that it has been found in the Arctic, in the Mariana Trench, in human feces, salt mines, etc., etc. So microplastic is everywhere, and therefore it's a bit disappointing that we don't have a lot of studies showing what it does to our health. Next slide, please. But there are a few. So what we know is that microplastic particles um, can function like magnets for many hazardous chemicals in water. So, for instance, also for persistent organic pollutants. And so, if these microplastics then enter the food chain, these chemicals come with them into the food chain. So, and then they may end up in animals and also in humans. As I said, there's not so much known about the health effects. And there are studies that link microplastic to inflammation, for instance. And it also has been found that it can cross the placenta. And recently I found a study on the exposure to microfibers. And this study links the inhalation of microfibers to lung problems and even to like a worse COVID-19 recovery. But as I said, these are single studies and we need much more information, and we may hear more about that later. And yeah, next slide. And I think I wanted to provide you a little overview, but I'm happy to get your questions. And I'm also curious to hear what the next two speakers will present to us. So thank you.
I hope you can hear me again. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for this great introduction. So we have a chat here, and your comments should come in through that one, but I don't see any, so I will ask one of the questions that popped into my mind when I followed your slides. These kind of pie chart with the chemicals that were with the hazardous chemicals that were found in everyday objects, in everyday plastic items. There were like 20% were known and 80% were unknown. So it sounded to me like we are like creating new compounds that we are exposed to, but we don't know them at all. That was quite frightening for me.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So it may be that they have, that they are not harmful for health or environment, but I think there is a certain chance that they are, and certainly more research is needed. And yeah, so this is really scary. It should not happen, but I'm afraid that this happens all the time, also with other products.
Yeah. So I don't see any questions yet. So I would thank you once again and then move on to our second speaker for today, Ella. She is a UK-based environmental activist and founder of the End Period Plastic campaign, which is an award-winning campaign that has been leading to significant changes in the period industry. Uh, Ella has been influencing manufacturers and supermarkets to make real changes, and councils and governments to spend the period poverty funding on eco-friendly products. So Ella, thanks again for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for the introduction. And wow, that was an amazing talk by Alexandra, and so much to think about as well. It really is scary when you think about all of these things that we don't know about and what they could be causing. So yeah, hi, I'm Ella. As Linda mentioned, I'm an environmental activist. I a petition back in 2018 to remove plastic from period products. And it all started for me when I was a postal worker. So I was delivering letters and parcels on my route. But I noticed the amount of rubbish that was being thrown away increasing. And it was kind of that everyday thing that kept happening. And I just kept thinking, how much are we throwing away on a national scale in the UK? And it really concerned me, because I think, you know, a lot of the time we don't really have that connected relationship with what we use and where it goes. So that was kind of my first light bulb moment. So then I started to make switches, like using a reusable water bottle and washable makeup wipes instead of disposable versions. And I was feeling so positive about the changes that I was making. But shortly after that, my period started, and for the first time, I realised how much plastic waste I was generating during just one menstrual cycle. I did some online research, and I was horrified to find out that the tampons and pads that I'd been using for so many years could contain up to 90% plastic. And when I became aware of it, I kept asking myself, how didn't I know about this sooner? And I think it's a question that a lot of others, when they find out, ask themselves too. But I think it has something to do with that long-standing stigma and taboo around talking about periods, especially here in the UK. And I don't know what everyone else's experience is with period education, but when I was at school, my teacher told me to use these when the time comes, and it was branded product samples from companies like Tampax and Always. And that's a big problem, because these brands are getting in there from a young age. They're engendering brand loyalty as soon as possible. And when you're given a branded product like that, you don't ask questions, and it just starts that consumer cycle for years and years to come. So we don't really consider it, and it's something that we leave by the wayside. And when I spoke to my family and friends about it, they were surprised as well. So I went into my local supermarket to get an alternative option, but there wasn't any. It was either plastic or plastic. And that really frustrated me, because if we haven't got access to these choices, how can we truly make a decision about what we buy as individuals? We can't. So this really frustrated me, and I switched to eco-friendly products and thought someone else will do something about this problem. But it just kept bothering me, and it just didn't make sense that, one, a product that we're using for just a few hours is taking centuries to break down, and that, two, if small eco-friendly companies could make them without plastic, then so could the big brands too, and there wasn't any reason for them not to. So I started the petition and it took off. And you might be thinking, so like, what's the big deal about period products? Like, why focus on them? But the plastic pollution conversation is so dominated by things like bags and bottles, and we don't really go much beyond that. And period products aren't something that often gets spoken about, yet they're the fifth found polluting Europe's beaches. They're more commonly found than straws or coffee cups, which just goes to show how much of an impact this one product is having. Now, the production of them, of course, contributes to the extraction of fossil fuels being used. They're incinerated, sent to landfill, or end up in the environment. and they end up in the environment when they're wrongly flushed down the toilet. So they get into our riverways and then they enter the sea. And when that happens, as Alexandra was saying, they break down into smaller pieces like microplastics and fibers. And that's a huge problem for ecosystems because they're entering the food chain. And some research in Wales has shown that 1 in 2 aquatic insects actually contains plastic. And that's then getting into the wider ecosystem. And we don't really know the impacts that is having truly on those yet, because there's not enough research. And even in the UK, crabs in the River Thames have been found with stomachs full of plastic, including the plastic from period pads, which is like that first link between this problem and it being ingested by an animal. So this use of plastic is totally unnecessary. There's no reason to use it, and the harmful impacts are avoidable, which is why I call on manufacturers and retailers to actually take that responsibility. Because I think all too often with these big brands and supermarkets, they like to put that ownership on us as individuals, but they've got so much money and so many resources to actually bring about change. And that's exactly where it needs to happen so that we can stop these negative impacts at source. To date, the campaign has risen to over 247,000 signatures, and it's been leading to significant changes in the period industry. So far, 3 retailers have removed plastic tampon applicators from their products, which saves 17 tons of plastic each year. And it sparked many others to develop and launch their own eco-friendly ranges, which is great because it's meaning that it's more accessible to people across the UK. And we really need that collective action happening on all levels. You know, we can make changes as individuals, but we need that change as well from industry and from governments. And a bit of my work has been in kind of like the period poverty sector. So here in the UK, many of the have made these products freely available at schools and colleges for those who can't afford them because they miss out on their education and on opportunities. So when that came up, I was like, hey, we spend that money on in a way that is tackling period poverty, but it's also tackling plastic pollution and protecting the environment. Let's spend it on eco-friendly products. And that's had such a positive reaction from Welsh councils, where 5 councils have committed to 100% of their funding going on sustainable products like eco-friendly tampons, pads and reusables. And the Welsh government has made the decision for 50% of funds to be spent in that way as well. So that's a little bit about what I do and the problem as well. And I hope that was all right.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really inspiring. And I think that this is something that many people who menstruate also relate to. There's been an increase, I think, in the like in the public discourse about the topic over the last years. And as Alexandra was mentioning earlier, there's an issue of transparency here as well, so that
Yeah,
we are not really aware of
yeah,
what is in
definitely.
the products.
Yeah, because these manufacturers don't have to disclose that information, and here, at least in the UK, they're considered medical devices, so they don't actually have to list the ingredients of the on their packaging. And that's something that I've been calling for them to do as well, to have that transparency. I know that there has been some success in the state of New York, where a group have campaigned for it to be law that those manufacturers have to put there, especially because it's such an absorbent part of our bodies as well. And you know, we're using these products for maybe 40 years, and we're using them for extended periods of time. So it does make you question what is in them, what the impacts are as well. Like, you know, if I had known all that time ago that there was plastic in these products, I would never have used them because it's just not natural.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you, not why, but so also many people are starting switching to reusable products. So like um, uh, yeah, menstrual cups and menstrual underwear. And do you notice the same problem there, or is there more? Because that's also textile. So we might just be we might be, of course, helping the environment by not producing as many single-use products, but still not solving the problem at its roots.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of innovations in the period industry, and I think there's been there have been even some research and reports about kind of what period pants contain, whether it's okay to use them. I personally, I use them. I've tried them, and I know a lot of people really like using them. Again, they are made of polyester. They have to have that absorbent layer in the bottom of the pants to kind of hold that liquid. And they can't do that in a plastic free way at the moment. I mean, textile wise, but then you're reusing it again and again. So I guess you have to weigh up what is better. Again, then you get microplastics from the fibers when it's such a difficult one to balance and weigh up, because as well you can use them for say 2 to 3 years, and it's important that they don't just become a fast fashion item. And that they're actually made properly, because I know that there are a lot of different retailers and brands starting to make them now very cheaply. So it does make me question the quality of them and what they contain. But then on the other hand, affordability, it makes them more affordable for people to change. And I mean, when you've got a pile of products, disposable products versus a pair of pants, I mean, you're probably saving more with a pair of pants. But again, I think probably one of the best choices, if you can use a menstrual cup, is to go for that kind of product, because they're normally made out of medical grade silicone.
Yeah, thank you. You touched a lot of important issues. The one of accessibility, the one of weighing. I mean, that's the reason why we do plastic mountains, right? Because we know that there are advantages for using plastics at the moment, but there are also disadvantages, and it's such a complex problem to go through with it.
Yeah, it is. And there's so much entwined in it all, especially when it comes to issues like period poverty and the question of how do we make those products accessible. You know, often sustainable products are more expensive when that shouldn't really be the case. You know, they should be cheaper than the ones that are more polluting. But unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. And let's hope that it goes the other way. But then through more and more people buying these more sustainable products, the price will go down and demand more.
Yeah, thanks again. I see that there are 2 questions in the chat, but I think they were more for Alexandra or as a general topic, so I would leave them for the final discussion. And then I would leave the floor to Dr. Philipp Schwabl, who is a consultant for internal medicine and researcher at the Medical University of Vienna and at the University College London. And his research focuses on chronic liver diseases and on the impact of microplastics and nanoplastics in the digestive tract. Thanks again for being here today.
So thank you as well. Thank you for the invitation to give you some of the insights to my research. And especially congrats to those amazing talks and the impact that you made, Alexandra and Ella. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see the screen, but it's the whole screen. It's not just the presentation. That's
Now I
yes,
press
now
the
it's the
magic button.
presentation. Yes, perfect.
So my name is Philipp Schwabl. And I'm a gastroenterologist, so my focus is the human digestive tract. And the main question is there microplastic in the digestive tract, and is it a reason for concern? These are the questions that I would like to discuss with you today, and we all know the famous proverb, you are what you eat. And actually, I think each of us has experienced at least one situation where, while eating, you felt a tiny particle in your mouth, and that just didn't belong there. After removing it, this foreign body turns out to be a small piece of plastic. Luckily, such impurities in our food occur rarely. At least that's what we think, because the smaller the plastic particles are, the harder they become perceptible and detectable. And so it appears that microplastic has entered our everyday life and diet. But is it really worrisome? Well, let's start with some definitions and scientific reports before you can make your own conclusions. Microplastic is defined as particles which are smaller than 5 millimeters, and they most commonly emerge as degradation products from larger plastic parts. Plastic itself is a very broad term and encompasses a wide variety of organic polymers, of which the most popular are polyethylene and polypropylene and polystyrene. Because plastic is so versatile, it has become an indispensable part of our everyday life, and correspondingly, the global plastic production has developed rapidly. As you can see here, this graph shows that in 2021, we very likely have already exceeded the 400 million ton mark of global plastics production per year. That's a lot. Unfortunately, this strong rise in plastic production is accompanied by global plastic pollution. And sadly, plastic is not very well biodegradable. So rather, it comes to a slow decay and thus the formation of microplastics. This world map shows that nowadays the oceans, as well as the rivers and lakes, have significant microplastic concentrations. It's therefore not surprising to find plastic in the digestive tract of marine life, for instance in penguins, seals, and whales. However, microplastic was also found in tuna, shrimp, and mussels. And this initially marine biological observations were the catalyst to investigate other foods as well. So microplastic was later found in salt or water bottles. And accordingly, the question was obvious, is microplastic also found in humans? Or do humans consume microplastics with their food? And if so, how much? Surprisingly, there have been very few human studies on that topic so far, and that was the idea to investigate this question if microplastics had already found their way into the human intestine. So what we did 2 years ago was tackling this question in a small but well-prepared and geographically widely dispersed pilot study. So for this, we asked 8 volunteers from Europe and Asia to donate a stool sample that subsequently was then analyzed for the presence of microplastic. Of course, as it is a prospective study, there were some exclusion criteria to make sure that we're studying healthy subjects. And as you can see here, the participants should not follow a special diet or have any intestinal diseases, and in particular should not take any drugs that affect digestion. In addition, the test subjects had to document their eating and drinking behaviors. The use of cosmetic products and their composition were also asked. What you can see in this picture here is a sample collection box, as it was sent to each subject. The test person was asked to defecate on aluminium foil in order to avoid contamination by the toilet water, and then put a sample into the glass bottle with a prepared metal spoon. The samples were then shipped to Vienna. Since the analysis of microplastic is a very complex and above all ultra-pure process, I looked for experienced collaborators and found Dr. Liebmann, an expert from the Environment Agency Austria. Together, we were able to plan and carry out the study. Initially, it was a challenge to adequately prepare the stool because stool is a very heterogeneous mixture and it contains many fibrotic fibers and particles that makes the analysis difficult. So after chemical preparation, we were able to obtain a filtrate, as you can see here, which we then subjected to a so-called Fourier-transform infrared microspectroscopy analysis. So here you can see such a filtrate, and the particle that lights up brightly further was then analyzed, and you can see the sample spectrum is the black line, and the reference spectrum is the red line, and they both correlate pretty well, so we can say that this particle is polyoxymethylene. Of course, this is a very complex and also costly and tedious analysis, but ultimately we were able to show, to successfully complete it and analyze all the samples that we have received. And now I'd like to guide you through the results of this study. As you can see, this is the description of the cohort. In total, we had 8 study participants. The age distribution was between 33 and 65 years. None of them were vegetarian, and 6 ate fish or seafood during the observation period. All of them had contact with plastic-wrapped food, and an average of 750 milliliters per day were drunk from PET bottles. The subjects gave about 34 grams of stool, and in fact, we found microplastics in all of these samples, and that is the astonishing and important, most important readout of our study. On average, we were able to measure 20 microplastic particles per 10 grams of stool, and the size ranged between 50 and 500 micrometers, which was also due to some technical limitations. We searched for the 10 most common types of plastic, and as you can see in the graphic below, we found a total of 9 different plastic types in the stool samples. Altogether, each sample comprised of about 3 to 7 types of plastic. But not all types of plastic were present with the same frequency. This pie chart therefore shows the relative frequencies of the types of plastic, and polypropylene and polyethylene terephthalate, PET, they were detectable in all samples. Together with polystyrene and polyethylene, they made up to more than 95% of all microplastic particles. So even if small, that study caused a major interest, and I was overwhelmed back then by the media coverage. And meanwhile, most importantly, our results have also been confirmed and expanded by other research groups. As it is usual in science, answering one question usually leads to many more. And so I think it's very exciting to find out what are the sources of microplastics in our food, what are the clinical consequences of microplastic in the gut, are there any links to gastrointestinal diseases, and how can we best prevent the global plastic pollution with microplastic. So at least briefly, I would like to mention 2 recent studies in this context, where very large amounts of microplastic were found. On the one hand, in tea bags, and also in plastic baby bottles. Importantly, the common denominator of both studies is heating or cooking with plastic, which actually multiplies the microplastic burden. And the question about uptake has been answered already in one of the previous talks. Indeed, there are some first signs that plastic might penetrate the intestinal barrier. Actually, it might also have a negative effect on the intestinal barrier. And the other study is also a confirmation study that I did together with colleagues from the Charité Berlin, where we also found microplastics in placenta and meconium samples. Meconium, that is the term for the very first stool of a newborn child. So this appears to be the first evidence and definitely triggers some subsequent investigations. However, one major question remains, and that is the initial one. Is there enough evidence to state that we are at risk? I think there are several limitations, and we have outlined this also in a letter recently. Some of these key limitations are due to inhomogeneous testing materials, inhomogeneous testing conditions, analytical constraints, especially when it comes to nanoplastic, which is really difficult to analyze, and also issues with comparability. For instance, when you translate a study which has been performed in animals to humans, that cannot always be seen as identical. So I'd like to to summarize and conclude with a famous quote from Paracelsus, who said, "It is the dose that makes the poison." And I think at the moment there is no need to be worried, but it certainly remains a fascinating topic. And I'm sure that future researchers will further elucidate these important questions. So with this, I'm happy to take your questions and start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Philip, once again. That was really illuminating. I mean, we read it and we see it, but I think that for me personally, at least, hearing from the people that actually saw it in the samples, in the data, it's just a different feeling. And at this point, I would really like to ask you one of the questions that already came in the last days over our channels. How do you feel researching all of this and knowing that it affects you as well, that it affects all of us?
I think that's very exciting to be in this position. It gives you some insights as well how media perceives research. Of course, we tend to be very cautious when it comes to conclusions. On the other hand, media always loves to make headlines. So I think the reality is somewhere in between. And I understand it, and I think it's very valuable that this topic is something we are discussing right now, and that people are aware of it and try to improve the situation. I think that's very important. But there is no reason at the moment to freak out and try to live a lifestyle somewhere in the mountains without any access to any plastic. I think that would be too extreme.
Thank you. So for the time being, we can just breathe through. And
Well,
of course,
we definitely have to think of our future. Like the resources of our planet are not unlimited, and also the way we pollute our environment is something that cannot be sustainable forever. I mean, I'm not in the position of giving you a more elaborate answer because my profession is being a medical doctor and performing research in the gut. So that's a different topic. Nevertheless, I think this is one of the two ways how we somehow get this feedback. You know, the other one would be the lungs by inhaling it. And of course, those organs are prone to react in one way or another. And yes, if you would put me into a barrel with 1 kilogram of microplastic, I would drown, yes. But if I get those little tiny particles once in a while, probably it will not affect me too much. You know, imagine that the food that we eat nowadays is very clean and processed. Back then, probably there was particles of dirt and sand in our foods, and our gut could deal with it. So our gut is trained to have some particles which are not food and to select them. But nevertheless, let's try to improve it.
yeah, that's very important, interesting view. One question just came in, and I think it's directly for you. Um, what is most important in your opinion, the foods themselves or rather the packages? I think I assume given the results of your research.
So I cannot give you an answer based on my research, but on my experience and readings, I think it's more the packaging. Because if you think of a fish, for instance, yes, you might find some plastic particles, but then again, it's mostly concentrated in the gut of the fish, and you will not eat the gut of the fish. You will take it out and eat the muscles. You know, so I think that even though microplastics has entered the food chain, it doesn't really concentrate too much because those parts where the microplastic is present aren't eaten. This is not true for mussels themselves, but like for all the other fish and also meat, I think it doesn't reach significant concentrations. Whereas the packaging might have a bigger issue because it's so close to the foodstuff, and therefore it's easier to shed or get cut into it.
Thank you. And with this question, I think we can move on to the panel discussion. And this actually gives me already an opportunity to start with one of the possible solutions that we keep speaking about, which is would the implementation of bulk shops and plastic-free, so the incentivization, so to incentivize bulk shops, would that be a viable solution for our microplastic intake and more in general for the intake of also other contaminants, as we saw in Alexandra's presentation earlier? And whoever wants to reply, please go on.
Yes, maybe I can start. So yes, sure, this is the right step forward to use as less as possible, as less packaging as possible, and also be aware of other things. So switching to non-plastic products is often the better choice, like we saw with the kitchen utensils. So you could also use instead of using plastic ones that are full of chemicals, harmful chemicals probably, you could use stainless steel ones, for instance, or even like made from wood. And so there, for a lot of products, there are better options. Also, as Ella said, for menstrual products, there are also better options now. It wasn't like that 10 years ago, but it has changed. And I think a lot of that will change. And we need more awareness also on other products, like, for instance, clothes. So this is not so very well known, I think, among in the public or broader public. Yeah, so just my 2 cents.
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. I would like at this point to get back to one of the questions that were asked before, especially for polyesters in clothes and plastic, which contact food. Hasn't a health inspection been made before they are put on the market? And wouldn't a faster results be achieved if health-related inspections and sanctions were carried out? Are these inspections available? I don't
Yes,
know if, yes.
I don't know, maybe someone else. I'm sorry. I didn't want to jump in.
No, this was rather at the beginning, so that was probably for you.
Yes, so one would think that every product on the EU market, for instance, is well checked and that there are no problems, but this is not the case. So, and often people are really surprised if we tell them that this is not the case. And yes, we have, in terms of chemicals, we have REACH. And then there are several directives for instance, toys or cosmetic products. So these are separately regulated. And but however, there are, like, at the moment 200 something chemicals on the list, candidate list for substances of very high concern, which is not a lot compared to the estimation of 350,000 chemicals that are at the moment on the market globally. So, but this is a rough estimation because no one knows. And we also know that every week a lot more chemicals are invented and entering the market. So And in many parts of the world, there is no REACH, or often there is no chemicals regulation out there at all in a lot of countries. So a lot of chemicals enter the market untested, and they are being used. And it is very difficult to detect them sometimes, because you need to know what you're looking for. So if you don't know what you're looking for, you probably cannot find it. And for a lot of chemicals, there was no thorough health risk assessment or environmental risk assessment. And in the EU, it's a little bit better. It depends what we're talking about, but in some aspects, it's much better than in other parts of the world. But if you look at developing countries and countries in transition, the situation is really bad. And also, REACH does not apply to imported products. So if we import products, we import a lot that may not be okay. However, we can also not say that only imported products are the problem. So I remember when I worked a lot on the toy safety directive, there are dolls made in the EU that are really bad, and there are toys from China that are not so bad. So you cannot, there is no rule of thumb here that we can apply. But I mean, some help are like eco labels, if these are reliable ones. And then, yes, as you already mentioned, shops where you can buy like plastic free or packaging free, or they have also sometimes clothes that are made in a very sustainable way. So we have options outside the EU, or in many countries there are not so many options. And when we made the book, for instance, for children and youth, we had a youth council, and it was very interesting also to hear that plastic or packaging is super cool in some countries, because it's like the next step, not using the banana leaves anymore. So this also needs to be changed back again, if possible, because we also use so much plastic because it became cool in the 60s. It's if we think back to the movies and looking at the old movies, that was a cool new lifestyle. And now it's destroying our environment, and sometimes it's also not healthy. So not using it has somehow become cool again, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And to these, on this route of becoming cool, and like the perception that people have, there's been a couple of comments about this gap of wait, let me find out the question. Yes, if you have been observing, that's probably for all of you. It was in the context of microplastic, but that's probably relevant for all of your sectors. If you could observe any impact on public behavior or political change over the last year, if something is moving, and also why is there such a gap between what we know and what we act on? What is holding policy back?
I think sometimes, depending on the government as well, some of them can be kind of in bed with big industry, if that's the way you want to put it. There are lots of sometimes deals and things that don't get done because it's not in their best interests to sort it out right now, which is really frustrating. I know that it can get really it gets really annoying. But I think a lot of people are seeing the inaction from governments and global leaders on these problems. And it feels like there's a lot of talk, but there's no actual action being followed through. I think that we as individuals need to continue pressuring MPs and leaders on these things. You know, in the UK, we've got COP26 happening later this year, and the government here just aren't taking the right steps for the environment. They're kind of like, oh, we're hosting COP26, we're doing this one thing, but on the other hand, they're doing like so many bad things for the environment that it just doesn't make any sense. You know, these are the decision makers that should be making the best choices for our future and for the environment, and we really need to start to see that change and it being taken seriously. I don't think, you know, we've had a lot of big events happening in the last couple of years that have kind of shone a light on what's happening to the planet even more, and have made a lot more people, especially mainstream public, realize what's happening to the planet, and that they want to help and connect in that way. I think the pandemic, especially here, has helped more people connect with the environment and want to protect it. So there's definitely that public pressure and want to do something. It's just that the people at the top aren't necessarily making the right decisions.
I see Alexandra was nodding.
Yes. So I think we have to be very careful to make a distinction between real action and kind of greenwashing activities that are being promoted. So I mean, Hay Support is, for instance, among the group of NGOs being active on advocating for a global plastic agreement. So, and this is a very good example. So there are even big companies advocating for a plastic agreement, but you have to be very careful and look at it. And then you can see that, in fact, they are advocating for something that, for instance, is like promoting burning plastic in some shitty incinerators, and then or plastic to fuel, or plastic to energy, waste to energy, all this, or chemical recycling, which is also using a lot of terrible chemicals and water and what not. And so this is there's a tendency to use the hype around plastic at the moment to sell really nasty solutions, which we often call false solutions. And so there we have to be very careful. Also, other solutions, I mean, I work with Hay Support, we work a lot on textiles, as you already noticed probably. And so here we also talk a lot to industry, and what they want to sell is recycled polyester. But then one moment, someone from a textile brand said, well, if we really want to pull this through, we have to produce like a lot more PET bottles to meet the demands. And this is clearly not what we want. This is not the way we want to go. So in the end, it's always less and better. And so this is the way we need to go. And also not looking only at downstream problems, which is also important. Like what you find in the oceans, it's terrible. We need to do something about it. But we have to look upstream as well. And where does it come from, all the plastic? From fracking in the US, big oil companies. It's often the same companies producing, I mean, oil companies also producing plastics. And so there is a lot more to this than what some people want to sell to us, like the cool cool shoe that is made of plastic being taken out of the ocean. So yeah, I think the broader picture needs to be looked at, really.
And in your experience, I mean, that's probably a super difficult question, but in your experience, what puts the most pressure on the industry? Is it more the demand from the customers, or is it more the regulations and the legislative solutions?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't want to take off, but just to conclude on this, so I'm a political scientist. So I'm very convinced that political change happens if a lot of things come together at the right time. So we need to work at it from different angles. We need the scientists, such as like Philipp, working on the science. And Philipp, by the way, your study was really helping so much in advocacy work, I can tell you. And it's very good that scientists stay independent and do their work, and then NGOs go from there, or others, or also like competent authorities. So we need your science to have something in our hands to work with. So we need that. We need NGOs. We need the public. We need the media. And then we need some like open-minded policymakers that want to really achieve change. And then not to forget progressive industry. So in looking at Ella and the topic of menstrual products, it works because there are alternatives. So yes, it always needs a lot of different angles and a lot of different actors to kind of not, we don't sometimes need to work together, but some kind of hand in hand with the same goal, and then we can achieve change. So this is what I believe and what we try to do, and this is why I like our group very much here on the panel, because it represents like some of these aspects.
Yeah, so we need to reach that tipping point from all parts of society. That's great. And speaking of the role of specific parts of society, there is one question that's probably for Philipp. What would you say that the role of health professional is in combating the global plastic challenge?
That's a difficult question because I think modern medicine very much relies on plastic materials. And honestly, I don't want to miss the possibility to take on my plastic gloves before examining a patient. It's very important having these materials which can be sterilized and which have plenty of applications. So I think, yes, we use a lot of plastic in medicine, and I also think it is important. I also know, like from the history, that maybe in the past other materials were used, like glass or wool, but nevertheless, it could help to maybe refine some of the applications as Ella did, and think if there are also other options available. But I think it's a difficult area to start with. So I believe there are easier ways and maybe more obvious ways to reduce the amount of plastic waste. But I fully agree that the medical field also can contribute a part in this.
Yes, thanks. I know that the NHS, the UK National Health System, has taken a pledge to reduce their CO2 footprint, their carbon footprint. And one of the areas they want to work on is also plastic pollution. So I know that it's a big plan and that nobody's ever done that before. But somehow we are trying. I mean, they are trying, but also we as every one of us. Um, and one last question for Philipp. Sorry, no, yes. So you mentioned earlier that we need we don't know much about microplastics in the human body yet, and nanoplastics too, and that there's the lack of standardization for methods, for measurements, for techniques. When do you think, or what is your gut feeling? Sounds like a joke, but what is your gut feeling about when will we able to know about it more?
Difficult to say. I mean, the lack of standardization is something that every new field of science lacks in the beginning. It just takes some time until it evolves in a more standardized way. And so in some cases, there can be huge discoveries which completely turn a field upside down and then maybe lead to a conclusion that there is a direct correlation or connection between a certain type of microplastic and a certain disease. I do not want to rule this out, but the thing is, it could also well take 20 years of research, and in the end, we are not much more clever. So in either way, it's definitely worth investigating. In both organs, the lung and the gut, there are diseases where the etiology and the pathophysiology is not fully understood yet. And also in many diseases, you have the hypothesis that there are many hits which together cause a disease to develop. And so it might well be that plastic could contribute as one of the hits, which then lead to a certain disease. And given the inflammatory potential of foreign bodies in general, it likely could be that those are rather considered to be chronic inflammatory diseases. But it's so difficult at the moment to give you a direction or like a complete answer. We are now in the field of generating hypotheses.
And also, I'm a biostatistician. We're probably also in the area of generating data to study that at all, because it's a
Yes,
relatively new
yes,
area.
I agree. And also, maybe I could give you an example for another thing that everybody knows is not healthy, like radioactivity. But nevertheless, each and everybody of us has a certain impact of radioactivity just because we are here living on this planet, and we are used to it. And even if we increase this a little bit, like taking an airplane and flying somewhere, we have a little bit more of radioactivity there. Or if we go and make an X-ray, we have a little bit more of it. And okay, it won't be a big deal. But like if I'm going to have 100 CT scans, or if I'm going to fly like really a lot, like an astronaut, then it might increase the risk that this can cause damage. And then again, if I am close to an site where they work with uranium, or am unlucky to be victim of some big disaster where radioactivity is spoiled, then of course this can cause major problems. And so I think it is similar with plastics. At the moment, those levels are low. But if I take maybe a person who is living in conditions which are not so nice as we do, for instance, I'm thinking of people living close to a deposition site, or children playing in rivers which are heavily polluted. And then also having not access to nice food, but maybe food which is not in the best condition, then this is, of course, much more exposure. And also, we must think of people who work directly in the plastic industry, producing microplastics or plastics. There, the risk of inhaling it is much higher, you know. And there have been some investigations about those kind of people working in the plastic industry, that they might have an increased risk for certain diseases. But then again, we go back to the original answer. We don't know yet, but certainly it needs to be studied.
Yes, thanks. And while we leave a few more, couple of more minutes for the last comments to come in, I would take the opportunity to what you just mentioned, people that work in very close contact in the plastic industry, or people who live close to incinerators or landfills. This is also a matter of environmental justice, and that will be the topic of next week's panel. It will also be at 6:30 German time, like tonight. And I can also recommend to look up what Hey Support is doing, because they're really doing a lot of on that area as well. And yes, at this time, if I don't see any more comments coming in, if any of you has final words to share, please, that would be the moment. Otherwise, I would really like to thank you a lot. It was a great discussion, great insights, and thank you a lot for your work and for being here tonight.
Thanks so
Thank
much for
you. It was
hosting it and for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great pleasure.
Yes. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. And for those who want, see you next week. Bye.